A blazing summer night, a woman,
Please.
kidnapped, locked inside a filthy warehouse, her hands tied, her body shaking. Beside her, a loyal K9, chained and helpless. Outside, the roar of Harley engines fades. The black scorpions whisper, threaten, decide her fate. One biker leans closer, his voice cold. Sign, or neither of you walks out alive. But what they didn't know, someone was coming. And when he arrives, who will make it out alive? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far this story of hope and second chances can reach. The Texas sun scorched the cracked asphalt, the air heavy with dust and cicada song, and Rockdale shimmered under a blistering summer haze. Inside a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of town, Mara Collins sat bound to a steel column, her wrists raw from the rough rope cutting into her skin. Her breath trembled as sweat slid down her temple, pooling at the collar of her faded chambray shirt. The heat pressed down like an unspoken threat, wrapping her in silence, broken only by the faint whine of a loyal companion, her German shepherd, Aegis. Mara, 35, was tall and lean at 5'9", her frame shaped by years of lifting engines and crawling beneath rusted trucks at her small garage on Main Street. Her skin carried the golden undertones of long Texas summers, but now it looked pale against the shadows swallowing the room. Stray strands of chestnut brown hair clung damp to her face, her blue-gray eyes wide, alert, and unblinking as they tracked every movement around her. Once, those eyes had been bright, animated with quick humor and quiet confidence, but Hawk's death had carved something different into her: patience, discipline, and the ability to hide fear beneath the careful control he'd taught her. Breathe in, 4 counts, breathe out, 4 counts. She repeated the mantra now like a thread keeping her sanity intact. Beside her, Aegis lay on his belly, chained to a rusted pipe, his thick black and tan fur mottled with sweat and dust. At 5 years old, the German shepherd was massive, built with the strength and precision of a working K9. His sharp amber eyes locked on the bikers circling nearby, ears flat, teeth bared but silent. Hawk had trained him himself, back when missions and maps had been secrets Mara wasn't allowed to know. Aegis had been Hawk's partner, his shadow, his last gift to her, a living reminder of everything they'd fought through and lost. Now he looked restless, muscles tense beneath his sleek coat, as though straining against every link of the chain to reach her. The black scorpions were everywhere. 7 of them leaned in corners, their leather vests branded with the coiled scorpion insignia, sweat-darkened shirts clinging to tattooed arms, boots dusted with Texas dirt. Their muffled laughter filled the air, rough and cruel, rising and falling like coyotes circling prey. Mara caught fragments of their muttering. Garage's prime real estate. She'll fold sooner or later. Don't scratch the dog. Boss wants it alive. Each word hit like a hammer against the steel cage of her ribs. Then the footsteps came, heavy, deliberate, carrying authority like a weapon. Viper Kane stepped into the dim light, and the room seemed to shift with him. At 42, he stood tall at 6'2", broad shoulders filling the doorway, his close-cropped dark hair flecked with early gray at the temples. His jaw was sharp, unshaven stubble shading his tan skin, and a faded scar ran from his left cheekbone down toward his jawline, a reminder of a knife fight in his younger days. His cold hazel eyes, however, were what silenced the room, steady, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. The heat inside the warehouse seemed to retreat from him, replaced by something heavier, more dangerous. "Sign the papers," Viper said, his deep, steady voice cutting through the low hum of biker chatter. He stepped closer, holding a manila envelope in his hand, as though it contained her salvation instead of her ruin. "Sell me the garage, Mara. Make this easy on yourself. That place sits right where I need it. Highway access, storage space, perfect distribution point." He crouched in front of her, resting his elbows on his knees like a man offering a favor rather than issuing a threat. "Be smart." Mara stared at him, forcing herself to keep her breathing even, to focus on anything but the pounding of her pulse. Hawk's voice replayed in her mind, a memory that lived like bone beneath skin. "If anything happens, Mara, go to the lockbox under the workbench. Don't hesitate. Don't trust anyone." Hawk's caution had sounded paranoid then. Now, it felt like prophecy. Her fingers twitched against the rope, aching for the phantom weight of the lockbox key, hidden beneath a loose tile in the garage. Hawk had known something like this could happen. He'd seen shadows long before she noticed the storm. She lifted her chin, trying to ignore the beads of sweat trickling into her collar. "No," she said, her voice steady, quieter than she meant it to be, but sharp enough to cut. "The garage isn't for sale." Something flickered in Viper's eyes, a flash of annoyance beneath his calm exterior, but his smile only widened. Wolfish. Dangerous. He straightened to his full height and glanced down at Aegis, who growled low in his throat, his hackles rising like static electricity through his coat. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Viper said, gesturing to one of his men. A biker stepped forward, his arms roped with muscle, tattoos crawling like ink vines across his forearms, and nudged Aegis with the steel toe of his boot. Aegis tensed, growl deepening, teeth bared now, sharp and white in the dim light. Viper chuckled softly, low and humorless. "Nice dog. Shame if something happened to him." The threat sank into Mara like a hook, her chest tightening, but she forced her face to stay unreadable. Hawk had taught her silence could be power, that showing fear only sharpened an enemy's teeth. She clung to that now, though the pressure in her lungs felt like being held underwater. Her mind was already running ahead, mapping exits, counting steps, weighing chances, none of them good. One of the bikers leaned against the wall, flipping a switchblade open and closed with casual rhythm. Another muttered something about the heat, wiping sweat from his bald scalp with a dirty rag. The rest watched Mara like spectators at a quiet sport, waiting for the moment she broke. But Mara wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. The garage wasn't just her livelihood, it was the last piece of Hawk she had left. The place they built together with scraped knuckles, bruised palms, and midnight coffee. To give it up would be to let him die twice. "Clock's ticking, sweetheart," Viper said, his voice silk over steel as he dropped the envelope onto the concrete at her feet. "Think about it. You've got until sundown." He turned, boots crunching against the dusty floor, the sound of his authority fading as he left the warehouse, his men murmuring in his wake. Mara exhaled slowly, the tight coil in her chest refusing to unwind. She leaned back against the cold steel column, eyes closing just for a second, hearing the soft chain rattle as Aegis shifted closer to her, pressing his head against her knee as though to ground her. She whispered his name, barely audible, and his ears flicked in response. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of Hawk's mantra, 4 in, 4 out, holding herself together by fragments of memory and will. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle roared to life, the deep rumble rolling across the flat Texas fields like distant thunder. Mara opened her eyes and stared past the shadows, past the ropes, past the danger, clinging to the thought Hawk had left her before he was gone. If something happens, go to the lockbox. If she could survive this, she'd find it. 3 days before the suffocating heat of that warehouse, before the ropes, before Viper Kane's shadow fell across her face, Mara Collins had been alone in her garage late in the evening, the quiet humming of an old box fan pushing warm air through the open bay door. The Rockdale sunset had painted the sky in dusty golds and bruised violets, and the scent of motor oil, sun-baked rubber, and coffee clung to the walls. Her hands were greasy from replacing a carburetor on an old Chevy when she paused, staring at the corner where Hawk's workbench sat untouched since the day he left for his final mission. Dust motes drifted in the last slants of light, landing softly on the old metal stool, his battered wrench set, and the faint outlines of his handprints left behind in the wood. She sat down heavily on the stool, wiping her palms on a rag, the silence of the garage wrapping around her. Hawk's words, buried deep for months, returned now as if summoned. "If anything happens, Mara, find the lockbox, under the bench." Taking a slow breath, she crouched down, running her fingers along the underside of the bench until she found a loose wooden panel secured with a single screw. Her throat tightened as she unscrewed it with trembling fingers, pulling free a small black steel lockbox about the size of a shoebox. It was heavier than she expected, and the faded scratches along the edges told her Hawk had handled it often, hiding more secrets than he had ever spoken aloud. Inside, the first thing she saw was a satellite phone, compact, matte black, the kind issued to military operators for field work. Beside it lay a folded map of Rockdale and its surrounding desert highways, marked with small red X's and handwritten notes in Hawk's sharp, precise scrawl. Her fingertips traced over one specific mark, McKinley Storage Facility, circled twice. She frowned, trying to recall if she'd ever seen the place, but it was on the far west edge of town, past abandoned rail tracks and half-buried cattle fences. Beneath the map, a worn photograph was tucked neatly into an envelope. Mara pulled it free, staring at the image of Hawk standing shoulder to shoulder with another man she had never met. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dark blonde hair clipped short, his angular jaw partly shaded by 2 days of rough stubble. His face held the kind of quiet steel common in men trained to survive extremes, but his light hazel eyes carried a depth she recognized instantly. Someone who had seen too much, carried too much, and yet endured anyway. On the back of the photo, Hawk's handwriting read simply, "Theo Miller. Trust him." The sudden rumble of a motorcycle engine outside made Mara's heart leap into her throat. She snatched up the box, shoving it closed, when the front door creaked open and a tall figure stepped inside, the fading sunlight outlining him like a silhouette. "Theo?" she asked, voice tight, the name barely leaving her lips. He stepped forward into the garage, boots scuffing lightly against the concrete. Theo Miller was 40, standing just over 6 feet tall, built like a man forged from years of discipline and combat. His frame was solid but lean, muscles corded beneath a plain gray t-shirt, desert tan cargo pants hanging loose at his hips, and heavy boots dusted from long travel. The lines on his face were carved deep, as if the sun and life itself had conspired to etch their stories across his skin. His short dark blonde hair was streaked faintly with gray at the edges, and his jaw carried 3 days of stubble that gave him a rugged, untamed edge. But it was his eyes, pale hazel, sharp and steady, that rooted Mara to the spot. They carried the weight of Hawk's trust. "Mara," Theo said, his voice low and rough, carrying both exhaustion and purpose. "Hawk told me if anything happened, I'd know where to find you." He glanced around the garage, taking in the faint smell of fuel and steel, his gaze eventually landing on the open lockbox resting on the bench. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the photo. "You knew?" she whispered, disbelief threading her voice. Theo nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly, a shadow passing through his expression. "I didn't know when, but I knew this day would come. Hawk prepared for it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the buzzing of the box fan in the corner. Mara gestured to the lockbox, sliding the map across the workbench toward him. "What are these?" Theo leaned over the bench, his broad shoulders casting long shadows in the fading light, scanning Hawk's handwritten notes carefully. "Safe houses, observation points," he said quietly, tapping the circled location. "McKinley Storage Facility. This one's important." Mara swallowed, feeling the weight of the unfamiliar name settle on her chest. "What's there?" Theo looked at her, his steady gaze carrying an edge of unease. "If Hawk marked it, it's not nothing. I've heard whispers about the Black Scorpions moving shipments through abandoned properties. If they're setting up in McKinley, it's bigger than just a gang making noise." At the mention of the Black Scorpions, Mara felt a shiver chase up her spine despite the summer heat. She thought of Viper Kane, though she didn't know his name yet, the weight of Hawk's paranoia folding into her own dread. Theo studied her silently for a moment, then softened his tone. "Hawk wanted me to watch your back. You're not alone in this." The words cracked something inside her chest, where grief and exhaustion had been compacted into a single unyielding knot. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head slightly. "I don't know how to do this, Theo. I fix trucks, I change brakes, Her voice faltered. "I don't know this world." Theo leaned against the workbench, arms folded, his posture casual but grounded. "You don't have to know it," he said evenly. "That's why I'm here." A sharp bark startled them both, and Mara turned to see Aegis, her 5-year-old German shepherd, padding out from the side office, claws clicking softly against the concrete. His thick black and tan coat was glossy under the fading sunlight, his intelligent amber eyes focused sharply on Theo, tail stiff, body alert. Hawk had trained Aegis to read situations long before Mara had, and now the dog stood between them, muscles tense, silent but ready. Theo crouched slightly, lowering his gaze to meet Aegis's, extending a steady hand, palm down. "Easy, buddy," he said, his voice softer than Mara expected, the kind of tone soldiers used when coaxing nervous partners through hostile territory. Aegis hesitated, sniffed his hand, then stepped back, ears pricked forward but no longer growling. "That's a good sign," Theo murmured, glancing up at Mara. "He remembers me. Hawk and I trained him together on a few drills." Mara blinked, surprised but somehow comforted. In that moment, seeing Aegis and Theo reconnect felt like Hawk was still there, watching them both. Theo straightened, nodding toward the map again. "Tomorrow, I'll take a closer look at McKinley. I need to confirm what Hawk was tracking. If the Black Scorpions are setting up shop there, you need to be prepared." Mara hesitated, fingers curling around the edge of the bench. Prepared for what? Theo's gaze hardened slightly, the faintest crease forming between his brows. "For trouble, Mara? The kind you can't negotiate with." A long silence followed, the kind that filled the room with unspoken weight. Outside, the cicadas screamed their endless summer song, and the warm breeze carried the faint smell of asphalt cooling beneath twilight. Mara stared at the photograph of Hawk and Theo, her thumb brushing against the faded corners. Every instinct screamed that her life was about to change, that whatever Hawk had feared had finally arrived in Rockdale. And across the map, the small red circle around McKinley felt less like ink and more like a warning written in blood. Late afternoon sunlight bled into the garage, staining the oil-streaked floor with deep amber tones. The heat was thick and still, heavy with the tang of gasoline and warm metal. Mara Collins sat on the edge of Hawk's old workbench, the open lockbox resting beside her, when the crunch of tires on gravel outside broke the silence. A black SUV pulled into the lot, glossy and spotless, windows tinted too dark for Rockdale's dusty roads. A tall man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his pressed navy suit jacket before he closed the door with a soft click. He walked with the controlled stride of someone accustomed to authority, the heels of his polished leather shoes tapping lightly on the concrete as he approached the garage. Daniel Foster introduced himself with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the part. He looked to be in his mid-40s, standing at 6 feet even, with a lean, athletic frame beneath the fitted suit. His chestnut brown hair was clipped neatly at the sides, combed back with precision, revealing a forehead free of lines, though faint shadows clung beneath his pale green eyes, the kind of eyes that studied everything but revealed nothing. His clean-shaven jaw and symmetrical features carried the kind of polished sharpness more suited to corporate boardrooms than dusty Texas garages. Yet his posture was textbook federal, upright, confident, restrained. "Mara Collins?" His voice was smooth, unhurried, pitched just deep enough to project calm authority. He flashed a leather-bound badge from the inside of his jacket, the gold crest of the FBI catching the fading light. "I'm Special Agent Daniel Foster, assigned to the Phoenix field office. May I have a moment of your time?" Mara exchanged a quick glance with Theo Miller, who stood near the back of the garage, leaning casually against a steel pillar. Theo's expression was neutral, but his shoulders tightened, his pale hazel eyes sharpening with quiet suspicion. Aegis, lying beside Mara's stool, lifted his head and immediately tensed. The German shepherd's black and tan fur bristled subtly, and a low rumble vibrated from his chest, the sound closer to warning than aggression. Mara wiped her hands on a rag, stepping forward just enough to meet Foster near the entrance. "What's this about, Agent?" Foster slid his hands into his pockets, glancing briefly at the open lockbox behind her before locking his gaze on her face. "We've been monitoring increased criminal activity tied to an outlaw motorcycle gang operating in this area, the Black Scorpions," he said evenly. "We have reason to believe your property may have strategic relevance to their operation. I'd strongly advise considering relocating before things escalate." Mara's brow furrowed, but she kept her tone calm. "And why would my garage be so important?" Foster's thin smile revealed nothing. "Proximity to key highways, access to storage, high visibility," he said simply, his words rehearsed, deliberate. "Frankly, Miss Collins, it's a liability in an ongoing federal investigation." He pulled a slim folder from inside his jacket and laid it on the workbench, his pale fingers tapping the edge lightly. "An interested party is prepared to purchase this property at above market value, cash." Behind her, Theo shifted slightly, arms crossing over his broad chest. His military-cut shoulders filled the space without effort, but his voice remained quiet, casual. "Phoenix field office, huh? That's quite a drive." Foster's eyes flicked briefly toward Theo, assessing him, before replying smoothly, "Our investigations are multi-state. I go where the case leads me." Theo gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. My team used to work closely with Phoenix Bureau during cross-jurisdiction ops." He tilted his head slightly. "Haven't seen you before." A momentary pause stretched, thin and sharp, before Foster responded, his voice still smooth but edged faintly now. "I'm not surprised. Not all operations are public." The tension hung heavier than the Texas heat. Aegis growled again, deeper this time, claws scratching softly against the floor. Mara placed a calming hand on the dog's head, feeling the taut strength beneath his fur, her gaze fixed on Foster's measured, unnaturally polished composure. Something felt wrong. The man's shoes were too clean for Rockdale dust, his suit fit too perfectly for someone traveling field assignments, and then there was the folder, unmarked, crisp, deliberately placed like bait rather than evidence. "Thank you for the warning," Mara said finally, her voice steady, clipped. "I'll keep it in mind." Foster studied her for a moment, his pale green eyes narrowing slightly, then inclined his head. "Be careful, Miss Collins," he said quietly, turning toward the SUV. "You may already be on their radar." They stood in silence as the black vehicle pulled away, the rumble fading into the distant hum of cicadas. Theo moved first, stepping to the edge of the bay door, watching the SUV until it vanished past the trees. Then, without a word, he pulled his phone from his pocket and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Mara asked, following him. "Running his plate," Theo said, his voice flat, eyes scanning the device. The seconds stretched taut until his jaw set hard. Not federal, not even registered. He looked up at her, the weight of his conclusion cutting like glass. "That badge was fake," Mara swallowed, fingers tightening on the rag she still held. "So who the hell is he?" Theo stared at the empty stretch of road, pale hazel eyes narrowing beneath the sharp angle of his brow. "Someone who knows more about Hawk, about you, and about this garage than they should. And that means we're already tangled in something Hawk was tracking long before we knew it existed." Aegis barked suddenly, ears pricked toward the west. Theo crouched down, resting a steadying hand on the German shepherd's strong neck, his other hand brushing lightly over the old scar running across his knuckles. He was remembering something. Mara could see it in the faint tension tightening his jaw, the weight of a dozen missions Hawk had once hinted at but never explained. Theo folded the map Hawk had marked and slid it carefully back into the lockbox. "McKinley Storage Facility," he said finally, his voice low but resolute. "That's where this starts, Mara. We need to see what Hawk saw." Mara hesitated, glancing toward the fading sunlight beyond the garage. She imagined dark warehouses, hidden trucks, silent roads watched by strangers, and felt the old ache of Hawk's absence deepen. But she nodded anyway, fingers brushing unconsciously against Aegis's fur for steadiness. Tomorrow, they would go to McKinley. Whatever Hawk had uncovered, whatever the Black Scorpions were building, she and Theo were about to step directly into its shadow. The late afternoon sun bled orange and gold across the dusty fields as Mara Collins crouched behind a low ridge of mesquite bushes. Her breath slow, chest tight, the summer heat soaking through her faded chambray shirt. Beside her, Theo Miller adjusted his binoculars. Steady hands braced against his knee, while Aegis, the 5-year-old German shepherd, lay silently in the tall grass, his black and tan coat blending into shadow, amber eyes sharp and unblinking. From their vantage point, half a mile away, the McKinley storage facility looked abandoned at first glance, an aging cluster of warehouses built from corrugated metal panels, rust streaking down their sides like dried blood. But the faint glimmer of polished motorcycle chrome near the loading docks told a different story. Theo passed the binoculars to Mara, his deep voice low and measured. "Count them." 3 guards at the east wall, one perched up high on a container, scanning the dirt road. "Check the south perimeter." His tone carried the weight of experience, his pale hazel eyes tracking movements without the glass. Mara steadied her grip, focusing past the glare of sunlight until she spotted them. A pair of leather-clad bikers leaning casually against their Harleys, chatting quietly while their rifles rested within arm's reach. "They're prepared," Mara murmured, lowering the binoculars. Theo nodded grimly, his jaw tightening. More than prepared. This isn't just a biker clubhouse. This is staging. As he spoke, the rumble of approaching engines drifted from the west road. A matte black SUV rolled into view, stopping just shy of the warehouse gates. A tall figure stepped out, his fitted suit immaculate despite the blowing dust. Mara's stomach twisted instantly as she recognized the smooth stride and controlled movements. "Foster," she whispered. Daniel Foster, the supposed FBI agent who had visited their garage the day before, walked with deliberate calm across the gravel, his pale green eyes hidden behind tinted aviator sunglasses. Waiting at the gate was Viper Kane, the infamous leader of the Black Scorpions. Viper's broad frame dominated the space, his 6'2" build towering over Foster's leaner form, the scar along his jawline catching the dying light. They clasped hands firmly and exchanged without hesitation or disguise, as if neither feared being seen together. Theo cursed under his breath. "That's all I needed to see." Foster leaned close, saying something Mara couldn't hear, his posture too relaxed for an undercover agent. Viper gestured toward the warehouse, signaling 2 of his men to escort Foster inside. As they disappeared, the roar of additional motorcycles filled the air. At least 10 more Scorpions arrived, pulling in with military-like precision, their engines rumbling deep and low as they formed a defensive perimeter around the property. Theo scanned the area again, adjusting the zoom, his jaw clenched. More bodies, more guns. They're locking this place down. Aegis shifted suddenly, ears twitching, his nose pressed close to the dry earth. The dog began creeping forward, low and silent, pulling at the leash until Theo caught the motion and stilled him with a hand signal. Mara frowned, whispering, "What is it?" Following Aegis's lead, Theo parted a tangle of weeds and spotted what the dog had scented, an old, grated storm drain, half hidden beneath dead branches. The rusted cover bore faint etchings worn smooth with time, but Mara recognized the mark instantly. Hawk's map had circled this spot. "It's here," Mara breathed, kneeling beside the drain. Theo crouched low, running his fingers over the corroded metal edges. "Prohibition-era tunnels," he muttered, his voice grim but tinged with admiration. Back when McKinley doubled as a smuggling hub, Hawk must have found records of the original blueprints. He glanced up at Mara, his pale hazel eyes intense beneath the fading sun. "This is how we get in without drawing fire." They exchanged a quiet nod. Whatever Hawk had uncovered, this tunnel was part of his contingency plan. As shadows lengthened, Theo dug his elbows into the dirt, scanning the warehouse perimeter once more through the binoculars. His voice was low, controlled, the tone of a man cataloging threats before a storm. "See that scaffolding near the southern bay doors? They've doubled security there. 6 men now, not 4. And there," he gestured toward the west loading dock, where a forklift operator in a sleeveless shirt rolled a steel container into place. "That's not storage. That's staging gear for something incoming." Mara squinted, watching as bikers worked quickly, hauling black crates from the dock to inside the warehouse. She couldn't see the labels, but each box bore hazard markings, red diamond stickers indicating volatile materials. Theo slid back into the shadow of the ridge, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "This isn't routine. They're prepping for a shipment big enough to require armed security, and they want McKinley airtight before it lands." "When?" Mara asked softly, pulling Aegis close by the collar as he whined quietly, uneasy. "Soon," Theo replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the warehouses. 2 days, maybe 3. Hawk's notes mention timing. If we're right, that big shipment he flagged, it's happening here. The realization pressed down like the weight of the heat, thick and stifling. Mara glanced toward the drain again, tracing the jagged etching Hawk had left behind years before. Everything Hawk had feared was unfolding. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying faint laughter and the metallic clink of weapons as the Scorpions shifted patrols around the fence. Theo's attention stayed locked on Viper's silhouette as the gang leader reemerged from the warehouse, standing shoulder to shoulder with Foster, their handshake complete, their shared plan sealed in silence beneath the setting sun. Theo exhaled slowly, adjusting the strap of his worn canvas bag across his shoulder. "Tomorrow night," he said softly, his pale hazel eyes reflecting fading light like shards of steel. "We go back. We find out what's inside." Mara nodded, one hand resting on Aegis's thick fur, grounding herself against the swirl of heat and dread. The storm Hawk had warned her about was here, gathering at McKinley, and now they were standing directly in its path. Night had settled over Rockdale, the summer heat lingering heavy even as crickets began their relentless song. Mara Collins parked her old pickup outside the garage, the engine clicking softly as it cooled beneath the pale glow of a street lamp. Aegis sat in the passenger seat, his black and tan coat catching faint highlights beneath a dim light, his amber eyes alert, nose twitching at something unseen. She reached over, scratching the strong line of his neck, murmuring, "Just one more night, boy." But before her hand even fell away, Aegis's ears shot up, his growl low, rumbling deep from his chest. The ambush happened fast. Shadows detached from the alley beside the garage, 4 men in dark clothing rushing her without a word. One of them was tall and broad, his bald scalp glinting faintly beneath the light, tattoos climbing up his neck like ivy. Another was wiry, sharp-faced, with greasy hair tied back into a small knot, and a jagged scar running from the corner of his lip to his chin. The third carried a stun baton, the faint blue crackle sparking in the dark, and the fourth was stockier, his hands rough and calloused, the faded patch of the black scorpion stitched onto his leather vest. Aegis lunged first, snarling, teeth flashing white, but the man with the baton jabbed forward, striking his flank with a burst of voltage that dropped him mid-leap. "No!" Mara screamed, struggling as 2 of them grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back, while another shoved a black hood over her head. Her boots scraped against the rough asphalt as they dragged her toward a waiting van, her muffled shouts drowned beneath the roar of a motorcycle somewhere nearby. Inside the McKinley warehouse, the air was heavy with oil, sweat, and cigarette smoke. Dim floodlights illuminated stacks of black crates and scattered tools across the concrete floor. Aegis lay chained to a steel beam, his chest rising and falling shallowly, but his eyes open, glimmering faintly in the low light. Mara sat restrained to a metal chair, wrists bound, the ropes biting deep into her skin, breath ragged beneath the suffocating silence. Viper Kane stepped out from the shadows, the scar along his jaw catching the cold light. He was dressed casually tonight, black jeans, a fitted gray Henley rolled to his elbows, showing the hard lines of his forearms inked with serpentine tattoos. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room, his boots clicking softly against the concrete until he stopped just in front of her. "You know," Viper said, his low graveled voice deceptively calm, "I thought we'd be done by now. Sign the damn papers and this all ends." He crouched slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his sharp hazel eyes locking on hers. "But you're stubborn, just like Hawk." At Hawk's name, Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Viper smiled faintly, but there was no warmth behind it. He turned his head slightly, gesturing toward Aegis. "Beautiful animal, isn't he? Strong, smart, loyal." He crouched near the dog, fingers grazing the chain lightly, and Aegis growled low, hackles raised, amber eyes fixed on him with unrelenting defiance. "You know," Viper continued softly, "there's a guy in Houston who pays top dollar for dogs like him. Underground pits. They fight until there's nothing left but broken teeth and silence." He glanced back at Mara, voice hardening into steel. "Sign the garage over, or I sell him." Mara's heart pounded, but her voice came steady, quiet, and unyielding. "That dog belongs to a soldier," she said, her blue-gray eyes sharp as glass. "And that soldier is still watching you." For the first time, Viper's expression shifted slightly, irritation cracking his composure. He stood, running a hand through his cropped dark hair, then motioned toward his men. "Lock her up. She'll come around before the shipment lands." Meanwhile, far from the warehouse, Theo Miller sat in a dimly lit diner off Highway 79, his back to the wall, hands folded on the table. Across from him sat Sheriff James Porter, a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, his sun-weathered skin creased with deep lines from decades spent under the Texas sun. His once dark hair had turned silver at the temples, cropped short beneath a faded sheriff's hat resting on the table. His deep-set brown eyes carried the weight of years spent fighting battles, both in uniform and as Rockdale's lawman. James sipped his black coffee, leaning forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. "McKinley?" he asked in a gravelly voice, quieter now, his expression grim. "You're sure?" Theo nodded, his pale hazel gaze steady. "Saw it myself. Foster's working with Viper. Mara's in danger. And now they've got Aegis too. James exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his weathered jaw. I knew the Scorpions were trouble, but this... Federal impersonators, armed shipments, tunnels? He shook his head. This isn't just biker noise. This is cartel-level infrastructure. Theo leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. Then we fight it like we fought overseas. We take it clean, fast, quiet. James nodded once, then pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts before sliding it across the table. Hawk trusted these guys. They served together. Minutes later, the door opened, and 3 men entered the diner, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Each carried the air of hardened soldiers, their posture straight, their expressions tight. The first was Reed Lawson, mid-40s, tall and broad, with a shaved head that gleamed beneath the diner's fluorescent lights. His square jaw was shadowed by dark stubble, and a faded burn scar climbed the side of his neck, peeking above the collar of his t-shirt. Reed was Hawk's demolition specialist back in Delta Force, quiet and deliberate, with a reputation for precision under pressure. Beside him walked Caleb Ross, early 40s, leaner but built with wiry strength, his ash-brown hair cut close and his sharp blue eyes scanning the room constantly. He carried himself like someone who trusted no one, a result of the ambush in Kandahar that had cost him 2 squad mates years ago. That memory made him cold, cautious, and brutally efficient. The third man, Marcus Hayes, stood a little shorter than the other 2, but was no less imposing. At 39, his frame was compact, shoulders thick, his dark skin catching warm highlights under the diner lights. He wore a faded army jacket, the edges fraying from years of use, and his deep voice carried an easy steadiness that grounded the group. Hawk had once called him the Heart, the one who kept tempers cool when missions spiraled toward chaos. Theo briefed them quickly, laying out what they knew about McKinley, Foster, and the shipment, due to arrive within 48 hours. Reed cracked his knuckles, Caleb leaned forward with narrowed eyes, and Marcus rested his palms flat on the table, his jaw tightening slightly. James looked over the 4 men, his voice low but resolute. We take them fast and quiet. No crossfire in town. McKinley's loaded with guns. We'll need precision, not muscle. Theo nodded. We move at night. We breach through the tunnels Hawk marked. First, we get Mara and Aegis out. For a moment, silence filled the diner, heavy and determined. The plan was set. Back inside McKinley, Mara sat alone in a dark storage room, the muffled hum of motorcycle engines vibrating through the walls. Aegis whined softly from where he was chained nearby, his amber eyes locked on hers. Mara leaned her head back against the wall, fingers tracing the grooves of the rope binding her wrists, clinging to Hawk's memory, and to Theo's promise. Somewhere out there, help was coming, but until then, she had to endure. The moonless Texas night stretched heavy over Rockdale, the cicadas' relentless drone swallowed by the distant hum of engines on Highway 79. In the tall grass behind the McKinley storage facility, Theo Miller crouched low with 4 men beside him, their breath measured, faces streaked with shadow and anticipation. At their feet lay the corroded storm drain Aegis had discovered earlier, its rusted grate pried open to reveal a narrow shaft of blackness beneath. Theo checked his watch, pale hazel eyes gleaming faintly in the glow of a red tactical light clipped to his vest. We go at 2300, he whispered, his tone steady but sharp. The heat was oppressive even at night, the air thick with the tang of earth and gasoline, but sweat rolled freely down the side of his jawline regardless. Sheriff James Porter shifted beside him, crouched low on one knee, his broad frame steady as stone despite the ache in his knees. His deep-set brown eyes scanned the ridge, watching the faint outlines of bikers patrolling with rifles slung low. James's weathered hands rested calmly on the grip of his service pistol, but his jaw was tight, the creases at his temples deepening in silent thought. Beside him, Reed Lawson silently checked the detonator nestled in his palm, his shaved head catching faint starlight. Reed's thick neck muscles bunched as he flexed his shoulders, a habit developed over years of field ops where patience was measured in heartbeats. His burn-scarred skin glimmered faintly as he whispered, "Charges set. East walls going up in smoke. Controlled. Nothing lethal. 30-second window." Caleb Ross knelt on the opposite side, his wiry frame blending into the dry grass. ash-brown hair damp with sweat beneath a black cap pulled low. His sharp blue eyes stayed locked on the shadows moving along the far perimeter. Two guards near the southern scaffolding, one circling back every 5 minutes, he murmured, his voice low and clipped, betraying the cold precision of a man who had learned survival in hostile cities overseas. Marcus Hayes crouched nearest the drain, his compact frame tense, dark skin blending into the surrounding earth. He adjusted the strap of his frayed army jacket, voice calm but firm as he said, "Tunnels clear up to the old maintenance corridor. After that, it's all open floor." He looked up at Theo, his deep voice carrying quiet steadiness. "We'll only get one clean shot at this." Theo nodded once, his eyes sweeping over the team before settling on the faint glow of the warehouse lights across the field. When Reed sets off the east wall distraction, bikers will regroup. Caleb, Marcus, you and I breach through the tunnel. Sheriff, you cover the exit route. We get Mara and Aegis out first. Then we secure whatever Hawk flagged inside that warehouse. Back inside McKinley, Mara sat in the darkness of a storage room, wrists raw from struggling against the rope binding her hands. Her breath came steady, but her chest ached from holding still too long. Aegis lay chained nearby, his amber eyes sharp and alert, his ears twitching at every echo beyond the door. The metallic taste of fear coated her tongue, but she forced herself calm, recalling Hawk's training on breath control during stressful situations. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. When the muffled sound of a motorcycle revving echoed from the outside, Mara used the noise to mask her motion. She leaned forward, straining against the chair until her fingers brushed against a sharp edge beneath the table's frame. Her fingertips grazed the rusted hook she had spotted hours ago and worked it into the binding. Slowly, painfully, the first strand frayed, then the second. Aegis whined low, picking up her intent, his powerful jaws already worrying at the leather straps securing his chain to the beam. Beyond the storage door, voices murmured, 2 scorpions pacing, their boots thudding softly against the floor. One voice was rough and rasped, belonging to a heavy-set biker named Brick Dalton, a man in his late 30s with a thick neck, shaved head, and arms covered in faded prison tattoos. His pale gray eyes carried the flat emptiness of someone who had learned to survive without conscience. The other voice was younger, belonging to Mick Torres, lean and jittery, barely 25, with unkempt dark hair and nervous hands. Mick had only joined the gang 6 months earlier and hadn't yet learned to mask his fear. Every so often, his voice cracked with uncertainty. "You think Viper's bluffing about the dog?" Mick whispered, his tone edged with unease. Brick snorted, the sound low and harsh. "Viper don't bluff, kid. That mutt's worth more than we are on the pit circuit. Girl better wise up." Mara clenched her jaw but kept working silently, letting their words fuel her resolve. At precisely 2300, Reed pressed the detonator. A sharp pop cracked the night, followed by a dull concussive thump. Smoke erupted near the eastern wall of the compound, throwing up sparks and filling the sky with haze. The ground vibrated faintly beneath them. Instantly, shouting broke out across the perimeter. The glow of flashlights swept wildly through the field as bikers scrambled, boots pounding toward the smoke. Engines roared to life, the compound erupting into chaos as orders barked and men abandoned their posts to rush toward the explosion site. "Now," Theo hissed, pulling the grate aside. Caleb slipped into the drain first, moving with wiry speed, followed by Marcus and Theo. Reed remained above, disappearing into the shadows with his rifle angled low, covering the eastern line, while Sheriff James moved to the southern exit route. Inside the narrow tunnel, the air grew cooler, damp with decades-old moisture. Theo's shoulders brushed against the walls as he crawled forward, flashlight off, guided only by Hawk's marked notes and the faint path Aegis had uncovered days earlier. The tunnel opened into an old maintenance corridor beneath the warehouse, the scent of mildew mixing with gasoline fumes drifting from above. Theo raised a clenched fist. "Halt." Caleb slid forward silently, pressing his ear to the thin metal grate above them. Muffled voices echoed faintly. At least 2 guards remained near the corridor entrance. Theo gestured quickly, 2 fingers up, 1 to the left. Caleb nodded, signaling Marcus with a tap on the forearm. Theo pushed the grate up slowly, silent as breath, sliding into the darkness above. The first guard turned just as Theo rose, but the veteran's arm snaked around his throat, pulling him into a chokehold that ended without a sound. Caleb tackled the second before he could shout, his movements sharp and efficient, a knee pressing into the man's ribs until his body went limp. Upstairs, Mara heard the muffled pop of gunmetal boots hitting steel grates and froze, unsure if this was rescue or danger. Then, a quiet whistle cut through the hum. The low, two-tone signal Hawk had once used during training. Her breath caught, hope surging like wildfire. She whispered sharply, "Aegis!" The dog lunged once, snapping the final leather strap free. Mara yanked the frayed ropes from her wrists, just as Theo kicked open the storage room door. Relief crashed over her like a tidal wave, her hands clutching Aegis's thick neck before Theo pulled her close. "We're not done yet," Theo said quickly, his voice low but urgent. "We've got 30 seconds, tops." As Marcus and Caleb secured the hallway, Reed appeared in the doorway carrying a battered metal case stenciled with faded labels. Inside were stacks of documents and small packets marked with chemical hazard warnings. "Found Hawk's ghost," Reed said grimly, passing it to Theo. "They're moving precursor chemicals, enough to feed half the cartel pipelines in the southwest." Mara's breath hitched, the scope of Hawk's warnings finally sinking into her bones. "Everyone out!" Theo commanded sharply. "We're ghosts before the Scorpions regroup." They slipped back into the tunnel, the chaos above swelling into shouting, engines, and gunfire from confused bikers scrambling to contain the supposed breach. By the time the smoke cleared, Mara, Theo, Aegis, and the team had vanished into the shadows, leaving only unanswered questions behind. The night in Rockdale was thick and breathless, the oppressive Texas heat still clinging to the ground, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. A storm was brewing, not of wind or rain, but of steel, gasoline, and vengeance. Inside the dimly lit sheriff's office, Theo Miller stood over a cluttered table where maps, blueprints, and hastily drawn diagrams were spread. The air smelled faintly of sweat, gun oil, and burnt coffee. Sheriff James Porter leaned heavily against the table, his sun-weathered face set in grim determination. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the open laptop, where a secured FBI channel displayed an encrypted transmission. The evidence they had stolen from McKinley, the packets marked with chemical hazard symbols, detailed shipment ledgers, and coded communications, was uploaded to the real bureau. On the other end, Special Agent Carla Jennings, mid-30s, appeared on the small screen. Carla had olive-toned skin, sharp features, and intelligent hazel eyes framed by loose dark hair tied back into a low ponytail. She wore a tactical vest partially zipped over a navy field shirt, her posture straight, voice crisp with quiet authority. "Sheriff Porter," Carla said, her tone firm but edged with urgency, "we reviewed the evidence. These chemicals aren't just recreational. They're precursors for mass narcotics production. The Scorpions are feeding cartel operations in 3 states. James frowned, rubbing a hand down his weathered jaw. "So, you'll send backup?" "Yes," Carla confirmed. "But our closest tactical team is 40 miles out on another op. Earliest we can get boots on the ground is 24 hours. Theo's pale hazel eyes hardened as he leaned closer to the screen, jaw tightening. "We don't have 24 hours. Viper's going to regroup and strike back tonight." Carla hesitated, then nodded once, her expression serious. "Then stall them. Keep the evidence safe. I'll redirect our units and get air surveillance rerouted over Rockdale by morning." The screen went dark. Theo exhaled slowly, turning to face the others. Around the table, Reed Lawson, Caleb Ross, and Marcus Hayes waited silently, each carrying their weapons and their ghosts with equal weight. "You heard her," Theo said quietly, his voice calm but sharp. "No cavalry tonight. It's just us." Reed cracked his knuckles, his burn-scarred neck twitching faintly as he muttered, "Then we make them bleed before morning." Caleb, crouched near the window with his rifle across his lap, gave a tight nod, his sharp blue eyes unblinking. "We hit their cameras first, blind them before they regroup." Marcus checked the magazine on his rifle, his deep voice steady, calm as always. "Then smoke the exits, choke their roots, make McKinley a trap." Aegis stood near Theo's leg, ears pricked, amber eyes locked on the group as if he understood the rising tension. The German shepherd had been restless since their escape, pacing in circles, nose twitching, claws scraping faintly against the floor. Theo knelt beside him, scratching behind his ear. "You've got one job, buddy, early warning. You catch even a whiff of trouble, you bark once." By 10 p.m., the team moved silently through the outskirts of McKinley, the oppressive night air damp with heat. The Black Scorpions had fortified their compound since the rescue, double guards at every checkpoint, rifles slung and headlights cutting across the gravel. From the shadows, Theo's team watched, mapping movements, marking weaknesses. Caleb moved first, crawling low along a drainage ditch, his wiry frame melting into the earth as he clipped a fiber cutter to the compound's main electrical conduit. One steady squeeze, then another, and the power to half the cameras flickered out. Across the field, Marcus and Reed worked in silence, setting smoke mines around the eastern and northern exits. The small cylindrical charges were rigged to release thick plumes of white fog on detonation, designed to scatter vision and force panic when bikers tried to retreat. Sheriff Porter, crouched near the patrol road, directed 2 auxiliary deputies to rig a backup failsafe, a set of crude steel tripwires strung ankle-high along the northern fence line. He grunted softly, his knees aching as he tightened the final knot. From his vantage point atop a low storage silo, Theo surveyed the entire compound through night vision goggles. He tracked patrol rotations, checked entry points, and tapped commands quietly over comms. Reed, cover east. Marcus south. Caleb, with me on west. Then came the sound, the low-rising rumble of Harley engines rolling across the back road. Aegis stiffened instantly, nose twitching as he stood, tail rigid. One sharp bark. Theo's stomach sank. Contact. Multiple. Headlights split the darkness as a convoy of 10 bikes swept into the compound, followed by 2 armored pickups. At the head rode Viper Kane, his muscular silhouette unmistakable, his scarred jaw gleaming faintly beneath the sodium lights. Behind him sat Brick Dalton, gripping a heavy machine gun mounted on the bed of one truck, tattoos glinting in the shadows. The battle erupted before Theo could give the order. Reed detonated the first smoke mine, a violent hiss filling the air as a wall of thick fog blanketed the northern exit. Gunfire cracked from the far side as Caleb opened suppressive shots on the advancing Scorpions. Sparks ricocheted off steel crates as bikers scrambled for cover, shouting orders over the roar of engines. Aegis barked sharply, sprinting ahead and circling the outer ridge, nose twitching as he tracked movement beyond the main gates. Twice, he stopped to growl low, warning Marcus of incoming reinforcements before they breached the smoke. Marcus picked them off with calm precision, his rifle steady even as chaos roared around him. Inside the compound, Viper bellowed commands, his voice carrying easily over the engines. "Find the tunnels! Flush them out!" Theo gritted his teeth, gripping his rifle as he shifted positions, laying down suppressive fire to cover Mara's advance. Mara, crouched low with a small sidearm Hawk had once taught her to use, moved swiftly along a wall of stacked containers, cutting through the haze toward the old maintenance corridor they had entered before. Her heart pounded, her breaths ragged, but her focus stayed razor-sharp on the plan. Draw them away, hold the line, and keep the evidence secured. Caleb's voice cracked over comms, sharp and urgent. 2 trucks circling the south fence. Marcus, Reed, on your 6. Reed dove behind a pile of steel drums just as bullets tore through them, sparks scattering like fireflies into the fog. He rolled onto one knee, firing controlled bursts into the smoke, his deep voice flat. "Holding east. Don't let them flank us." The Scorpions began to push harder, dozens of boots pounding over the gravel, their silhouettes darting through the smoke as motorcycle headlights sliced chaotic beams through the darkness. For 30 minutes, gunfire, shouts, and the growl of engines blended into a cacophony that swallowed the night. Theo's team fought like ghosts, striking from shadows, disappearing into cover, forcing the Scorpions into confusion and disarray. Every time they tried to advance, another smoke mine detonated, cutting visibility to nothing. But even chaos had limits. Through the haze, Theo spotted Viper regrouping his forces, positioning the machine gun truck at the center of the compound. "Theo," Sheriff Porter's deep voice rumbled through comms, "you've got 2 minutes before they breach that gate." Theo wiped sweat from his brow, his chest rising and falling with controlled urgency. "Then we make those 2 minutes count." The first light of dawn crept slowly over Rockdale, staining the horizon in muted shades of crimson and gold. The oppressive Texas summer air carried the lingering scent of gunpowder and scorched gasoline, hanging heavy over the fields around the McKinley storage facility. Smoke still drifted lazily from the scattered fires across the compound, curling skyward in ghostly wisps as shadows stretched long against the pale morning sun. Theo Miller crouched low behind a stack of overturned crates, his pale hazel eyes scanning the haze for movement. Sweat traced a path down his temple, soaking into the collar of his faded combat shirt. His chest rose and fell sharply with each breath, the tension vibrating through his sinewed frame. Beside him, Mara Collins gripped her pistol tightly, her blue-gray eyes alert and wide, the adrenaline still surging through her. Dirt streaked her cheeks, strands of chestnut hair plastered to her damp skin, but she stood steady, refusing to let fear overwhelm her. Aegis, the 5-year-old German shepherd, pressed close to Mara's side, his black and tan coat mottled with dust, his amber eyes sharp and focused. His ears twitched constantly, catching the faintest echoes of movement beyond the smoke, his breathing steady but shallow, like a soldier awaiting orders. From across the gravel yard, Viper Kane's voice bellowed above the chaos, harsh and guttural, carrying over the cacophony of shouting, gunfire, and roaring engines. The 6'2" leader of the Black Scorpions, his jaw lined with old scars, stood defiantly atop an overturned bike, barking commands to his dwindling forces. His tattoos glimmered faintly beneath the dim orange glow of smoldering fires, a fading empire inked into his skin. Beside him, Daniel Foster, the fake FBI agent, moved with a different kind of control. Tall, lean, his crisp white shirt stained with sweat and soot, Foster barked orders into a discreet earpiece Theo now understood wasn't bureau-issued at all. His pale green eyes darted constantly, calculating, cold, and efficient. Theo clenched his jaw, bile rising as the pieces finally fit. Foster wasn't just an informant. He was orchestrating the Scorpions' operations, running cover for someone bigger. "We're boxed in!" Caleb Ross's clipped voice rasped through the comms, his lean frame pressed behind a burned-out pickup on the southern flank. His sharp blue eyes darted between shadows, the taut lines of his wiry body humming with tension. More bikes circling from the west, 50 yards, maybe less. Reed Lawson, crouched to Theo's right, adjusted the sights of his suppressed rifle, his burn-scarred neck glistening with sweat beneath the pale dawn light. "We've got maybe 10 of them left who can fight," he said quietly, his deep voice flat and unshaken, the calm of a man who had seen worse storms and survived them. "But they're regrouping fast. Another push, and they'll breach the tunnels." Before Theo could respond, Aegis stiffened beside Mara, a deep growl rumbling low in his chest. The shepherd's ears pricked forward sharply, his amber gaze locking on the eastern perimeter, where the dusty ground trembled faintly under the growing vibration of approaching engines. Mara knelt quickly, steadying Aegis with a soft hand pressed against his powerful shoulders, whispering under her breath, "Easy, boy, stay with me." Then came the sound, the low, rhythmic thrum of rotor blades cutting through the dense morning air. It started faint, barely a murmur against the roar of motorcycles, but within seconds it grew louder, closer, until the shadows of 3 unmarked black helicopters swept across the compound. Theo's gaze snapped upward, heart pounding as one chopper descended fast, blasting loose gravel in a swirling cyclone of dust and grit. Figures in tactical black fast roped to the ground with practiced precision, rifles raised, helmets fitted with night vision goggles pushed above their brows. At their lead was Special Agent Carla Jennings, her dark hair tucked neatly beneath a matte tactical helmet, hazel eyes blazing behind ballistic goggles. Her movements were sharp and decisive, commanding immediate authority. "This is the FBI!" Carla's voice roared through a loudspeaker, steady and firm despite the chaos. "Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." The response was instant and violent. Viper roared something unintelligible, shoving 2 of his remaining men forward, as Foster barked sharp orders into his earpiece, scrambling to salvage the operation. Gunfire erupted once again, deafening and sharp, sparks showering from steel containers as bullets ricocheted wildly. Theo gestured sharply toward Reed and Marcus, his pale hazel eyes sharp with intensity. "Push right! Cut off their retreat!" Marcus Hayes, compact but powerful, sprinted low through the drifting smoke, his dark skin nearly blending with the shadows, his deep voice gritting into comms. "Southwest secured. 2 bikers down, 1 pinned." Aegis lunged forward suddenly, pulling Mara off balance before she realized what had drawn his attention. A scorpion biker emerged from the haze, a heavy iron crowbar raised, aiming straight for Theo. In one smooth, feral motion, Aegis leapt, teeth sinking into the man's forearm, ripping him sideways before Mara fired a single controlled shot to disable him. The biker collapsed with a strangled cry, Aegis circling back immediately, panting, eyes wild with focus. Then came the turning point. Carla advanced steadily with her tactical unit, forming a semicircle around Foster and Viper's positions. 2 agents flanked left, cutting off the northern escape route, while another squad blocked the west. The firefight slowed, then sputtered into silence, broken only by the whir of rotor blades above. "Drop it, Kane!" Carla barked, her rifle steady, voice low, but edged with steel. Viper's sharp hazel eyes darted wildly, his chest heaving, but as his men surrendered one by one, his defiance faltered. Finally, he dropped his rifle with a loud metallic clang, raising his tattooed hands slowly, fury twisting his scarred face. Theo turned his focus to Foster, whose pale green eyes had lost their calm calculation. Carla approached him, her gloved hand reaching for his earpiece before yanking it free, tossing it aside onto the gravel. She ripped the badge from his chest with a swift motion, holding it up for all to see. "You're not FBI," she said coldly, her voice carrying over the field. "You're done, Foster." Foster's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile, but he didn't resist as 2 agents forced him to his knees, zip ties locking around his wrists. As the last of the bikers were disarmed, silence descended over McKinley. The fires smoldered, the summer cicadas screamed from the distance, and the first true sunlight broke across the horizon, drenching the compound in a pale, blistering gold. Mara sat on the dusty ground, with Aegis pressed tight against her side, her hands trembling slightly as she unclasped the silver locket Hawk had left behind. The small hinge creaked softly as she opened it, revealing an old photo tucked inside. A snapshot of Hawk, younger, sunburned, grinning wide as he knelt beside Aegis and Mara in front of the old garage. Beneath the photo, scrawled in Hawk's familiar handwriting, were 4 words: "For when the sun hurts." Tears blurred her vision, but a quiet smile curved her lips as she leaned into Aegis, pressing her forehead against his thick fur. Hawk was gone, but the life they had built, the garage they had fought for, and the people who stood by her were still here. Theo approached slowly, crouching beside her, his weathered features softening as he watched her trace Hawk's words. "You did it," he said quietly. Mara shook her head gently, resting her hand on Aegis's back. "We did." The Texas sun climbed higher, hot and unyielding, casting long shadows over the battlefield now silent. For the first time since this nightmare began, Mara Collins felt peace. When the dust finally settled over Rockdale, Mara stood beneath the burning Texas sun, with Aegis pressed against her side, tears glistening but her heart steady. Through every loss, every battle, every night filled with fear, she had survived. Not because she was the strongest, not because she had all the answers, but because somewhere, somehow, a greater hand was guiding her steps. Sometimes miracles don't come as flashes of light or booming voices from above. Sometimes they come quietly. In the loyalty of a dog who never gave up, in the courage of friends who refused to walk away, and in the hope carried inside a small silver locket, waiting for the day the sun hurts and heals. This story is more than a fight against danger. It's a reminder. No matter how heavy your burdens, you are never truly alone. Even in the darkest valleys, God walks with you. He places people, chances, and signs along your path, just when you need them most. If you believe miracles still happen, if you believe God still saves those who call His name, then this story is yours too. May God bless you and your family. May He give you strength in your battles, hope in your storms, and peace in your heart. Now it's your turn. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a miracle moment in your life? Like this video if you believe in faith, loyalty, and second chances. Subscribe and join our community. Let's spread hope, one story at a time. Because sometimes, God sends a miracle exactly when we think we're out of time.